Today, the Iraqi parliament met to save the country, but the parliament broke up instead along the same ethnic and religious fault lines that are ripping Iraq apart. Iraq is now broken roughly into thirds, with members of the Shia branch of Islam in Baghdad and south, the Kurdish ethnic group in the northeast, and an extremist group of Sunni Muslims in the north and west. That extremist group calls itself ISIS. It has declared independence from Baghdad, and its mysterious leader is demanding the allegiance of all Muslims. Charlie Daggett is in Baghdad.
ISIS militants have been celebrating, parading the heavy weapons they've stolen from the Iraqi military. And in a new audio message, the group's leader put the call out for fighters everywhere to avenge what he called the wrongs done to Muslims worldwide. Take up arms, said Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and fight. Your brothers all over the world are waiting for your rescue. His speech lasted 20 minutes. Baghdadi has never released a videotape, and there are only 2 known photographs of him. And while Baghdadi was calling for fighters to carve up the country, Iraqi politicians were trying to find a way to hold it together. The Iraqi national anthem heralded the opening of parliament today, a fresh chance to form a new, more inclusive government made up of the country's 3 largest ethnic groups. But no sooner had the music stopped than the finger-pointing began. And when embattled Shiite Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki returned after a short break, he found that Sunni and Kurdish leaders had walked out. Few believe al-Maliki can hold on to power for much longer, leaving the country in a political gridlock and in the grips of a worsening war. Few people thought today would go smoothly, Scott, but Parliament had only been in session for about a half hour before fighting broke out. And more importantly, al-Maliki's party failed to meet its own deadline to form a new government, and proceedings have been suspended until next week with no real solution in sight.
Time that Iraq may not have. Charlie Daggett in Baghdad for us. Thank you. This evening in San Diego, a wall of protesters turned away 3 busloads of illegal immigrants, mostly parents with their children. The federal government was transferring the immigrants from Texas. There has been a surge of illegal immigration recently, and some folks in San Diego apparently had had enough. John Blackstone is following this.
The charter aircraft from Texas landed at San Diego carrying 140 undocumented immigrants, many of them children. They boarded buses for a 1-hour drive to Murrieta, California.
We don't want them here!
In Murrieta, demonstrators blocked the road leading to the Border Patrol station. Residents here have been resisting plans to have the migrants brought here for processing and health checks. The bus windows were blocked, but the shouts made it clear to those on board they are not welcome here. Alan Long is mayor of Murrieta.
We have droves of immigrants coming and nothing in place to really prevent that. What's happening now is they're basically dispersing them to many different backyards, and I think there are people and residents here in Murrieta that are ready to take a stand against that.
The nearly 50,000 unaccompanied children who've poured over the border are being held in crowded facilities as authorities try to find family members in the U.S. to care for them. Since most come from Central America, they cannot simply be put on buses and sent back across the border to Mexico. Enrique Morones, president of the immigrant aid organization Border Angels, wants more done to discourage parents from sending their children on the dangerous trek north. Isn't the way to send a message by sending them back to say, look, it's no good coming there, you'll just get sent back again?
We can't send back the kids that are here, the overwhelming majority of the kids that are here, because it's sure death. And we don't want to sacrifice anybody.
After an hour-long standoff with the protesters here, the buses turned around and left, Scott. The immigrants will now be taken to another Border Patrol station in the San Diego area for processing.
John Blackstone, thank you, John. A lot of Americans decided that it was time for a new car last month. New figures out today show that cars were selling at the fastest pace in 8 years. At GM showrooms, sales were up 1%. Ford sales fell 6%. Sales at Chrysler were up 9%. Anthony Mason tells us the sales gain at GM came in spite of all of the bad publicity about deadly defects and massive recalls.
A day after another massive recall, GM reported surprisingly strong sales, up a modest 1% in June, but with 2 fewer sales days than last year, GM says that equated to a 9% gain. The first half of the year, the company said, was its best retail sales performance since 2008.
Yesterday's headlines compared to today's headlines, I mean, they completely paint a story of two different companies, it almost seems. But
Jessica Caldwell is senior automotive analyst with Edmunds.com.
Are you surprised that GM's reputation hasn't seemed to have been affected by this?
It is very counterintuitive. I think when you think about all of the recall news out there and you have Mary Barra in Washington, D.C. testifying, you think that there would be some backlash for sales.
This year alone, GM CEO Mary Barra has recalled more than 25 million automobiles after acknowledging defective ignition switches in the Chevy Cobalt and other of its small cars. But in May, nearly half of the owners trading in a Cobalt for a new car purchased another GM product. That's actually a higher loyalty rate than before the recalls.
Some people are just sticking by the brand. I mean, they are doing a major safety review. And, you know, perhaps people think it may be a good time to buy General Motors since they're not going to overlook any quality issue, as it seems.
No memorial oration or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long.
President Johnson addressing Congress after the assassination of President Kennedy. Just 218 days later, 50 years ago tomorrow, Johnson signed that landmark bill into law. James Brown talked to one of the men who helped LBJ change the course of American history.
The top pen was given to me by President Johnson, used to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
You've got a hold of that pen.
I got that, baby.
80-year-old Clifford Alexander is still very proud of his time as an aide in Lyndon Johnson's White House. After graduating from Harvard and Yale Law School, he served as civil rights advisor to the president.
One of the few African Americans in the White House then?
The only African American on the staff at the time.
What was that like, Cliff?
It was like many things in this life, where black people were not included as much as they should have been. But in the case of Lyndon Johnson, he made me as comfortable as he made his white aides. He was a man who was forward-looking and a man who cared about people.
Alexander was part of a team working on the Civil Rights Bill, but he says it was Johnson's passion that produced the historic legislation.
First of all, his own righteousness. Secondly, his skill in dealing with the legislature. Thirdly, getting the civil rights leadership to come forward and to put pressure on him, on members of Congress, to do something about civil rights.
My fellow Americans, I am about to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
On the day of the signing, Alexander was seated in the packed East Room.
And was there a lot of talk or chatter or loose frivolity or no?
There was not a lot of loose frivolity. We had nothing to celebrate. Remember, what we were getting was the act, not the execution of the act. Nobody had gotten hired. Nobody was able to sit at the lunch counter yet. What we now had was protection for those who would keep that away from us as a right. And that was extraordinarily important.
A major part of the act established the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and LBJ would tap Clifford Alexander as the first African American to head the agency.
This was given to you by?
By President Johnson when I was sworn in as head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Alexander worked behind the scenes to put the first African American, Thurgood Marshall, on the Supreme Court, and also helped to push through the Voting Rights Act in 1965. But he feels the quest for equality is not over, and the same effort of yesteryear is needed today.
You have to, in this society, you have to push. And if you don't push, you're not going to get it.
And on July 2nd, 1964, that push began to pay off.
Can you rhyme? So if I say cat,
in the hat.
4-year-old JJ and his 3-year-old brother Joa are doing what children their age do. Running and playing 1 minute, pushing the next. When they act up at home, they are disciplined.
I think that they're typical 4- and 3-year-olds.
But at school?
He's been suspended about 5 times.
At 3?
At 3. and I can't make this up, I wish I was. He hit one of the teachers on the arm and they sent him home. And they said that they considered that hitting to be a danger to the staff.
The most recent report says 7,500 children nationwide were suspended at least once from public preschool. Yes, preschool. The alarming numbers reported by the Department of Education also say black students are being suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than white kids across all grades.
We know there is a correlation between doing out-of-school suspensions and expulsions and ultimately locking kids up. For far too many children in communities, the school-to-prison pipeline is real. And the fact that it starts as young as 4, again, simply isn't good enough.
In Los Angeles, America's second largest school district, Superintendent John Dacey finds the trend disturbing. Why are these numbers playing out this way?
Ma'am, I think they're the same biases that are in society. And so I think this is a reflection of the growth we have yet to do in this country around these issues.
What shocked him? The reason. The majority of suspensions in his district were for something called willful defiance.
It was things like failure to do homework, failure to bring your notebook to class. That's not willful defiance, that's adolescence.
A year ago, the district became the first in the nation to remove willful defiance as a reason for suspensions, and the numbers have dropped ever since. 3 years ago, there were 19,000 suspensions. This year, 8,000. The teachers' union never took a stance on the issue, with some teachers saying willful defiance has been abused, and others saying it takes an important disciplinary tool away from their classrooms.
I teach my kids all the time, education is your passport.
Jeanette Powell learned that the hard way. Long before her sons were born, she was labeled a troublemaker. As the daughter of a drug-addicted father, she struggled in school and life.
I was expelled from school when I was 3 years old, in preschool. And when I first got the phone call about JJ, I immediately thought back to that. You know, at a young age, I was told that I was a bad kid in school.
Jeanette proved them wrong, eventually got her college degree, wrote a book, and became an accomplished public speaker, even giving a TED Talk.
Get behind the line.
The Powells have worked hard to make a good life for their children.
My biggest fear is that they'll be labeled and that they'll believe it.
Every day she fights to inspire her boys, more a preschool to pre-med mentality.
Go! Go, Joa! Go, Joa! Go, Joa!
Than preschool to prison. Sarah Seidner, CNN, Omaha.
Scare at the beach. You'll remember it was caught on tape, 2 girls parasailing and crashing into a building. It was difficult to watch. And tonight here, 1 year later to the day, new sweeping recommendations for families headed to the beach. Tonight, ABC's Matt Gutman reports.
Trapped in that giant parachute, 17-year-old Sydney Good and a friend shooting down the coast like a lost kite.
Like, that feeling was terrible.
The cable to the boat snapping, sending the girls smashing into this building.
We are at the Commodore and 2 parasailers just smashed into the top of it.
Then into a parked SUV. That was 1 year ago today, and Sydney is still recuperating. And tonight, the National Transportation Safety Board issuing a stinging rebuke of the parasailing industry, accusing operators of poor judgment, lack of sufficient experience, and improper training. Sydney's parents telling us they thought their daughter was in good hands.
You just assume that everything is safe. They tell you, they advertise it's safe, fun. Yeah, you expect that.
There are no federal guidelines regulating parasailing. Tonight, the NTSB can only recommend that all operators be licensed by the Coast Guard, which doesn't sit well with Sydney's mom.
So when the NTSB calls for more regulations but really can't enforce them, how does that make you feel?
It makes me sick.
The industry organization responding that they support regulation and are working with the Coast Guard. Sydney went back to the hospital today to say thank you.
I didn't want to cry. I know.
She has undergone multiple surgeries.
Even if you think that she's going to wake up and come out and breathe on her own, we didn't know if she could walk. We didn't know if she could talk. They told us she would. She may not remember.
But today she was walking on that very same beach.
Rescue crews continued their search Tuesday for a missing teenager who was swept away in a Cedar Rapids storm drain after heavy rainfall in the area. The 17-year-old was playing frisbee with friends when he wound up in the drainage pipe on Monday. One of the teen's friends tried to save the boy, but was dragged into the drain with him. Authorities say that teen eventually emerged in a lake about a mile away and was able to get out of the water. Rescuers walked sewer-lined paths trying to trace the way the water might have carried the teen, but the fast currents prevented the searchers from entering the pipes.
At this point, the victim's family has assembled in the area, and we have a chaplain here to provide some type of comfort for them, emotional comfort at this point as this search is going on.
Rising storm waters have overwhelmed much of the city's sewer system, and the raging waters have left hundreds of thousands of people without power across the Midwest.
How's your Monday, good?
6 months ago, recreational pot sales caught fire in Colorado. Business has boomed, but so have concerns about safety. A 19-year-old fell to his death from a balcony after eating a cannabis cookie. And this man is behind bars, accused of shooting and killing his wife while reportedly high on pot and other drugs.
He told me that, he doesn't remember anything.
It's not clear what caused either of these incidents, but a common link, marijuana edibles.
The edibles do have a different effect on people.
With edibles, it takes longer to feel the effects of THC, marijuana's mind-altering ingredient, which can lead to people eating too much too soon. The side effects can be serious, including delirium and psychosis.
Everybody loves their chocolate.
And when it comes to tasty treats like candy or cookies, looks can be deceiving. Here's your regular candy bar, and here's one of those marijuana-infused candy bars. You can see outside the package they look practically the same. They smell almost the same. A lot of folks might eat one candy bar in one sitting, but that's where people are getting into trouble because this candy bar actually contains 5 doses of edible marijuana. Would the average person know what one dose looks like? We put it to the test using a smaller but even more potent candy bar containing 100 milligrams of THC, what's considered 10 doses of marijuana. How many servings do you think is in this?
I would have no idea. I know nothing about it.
I would say probably 2. Would it be 2 servings?
The whole thing.
The whole thing. So you think this is one serving?
Yes. My guess is it's probably pretty potent, maybe 4.
Well, you're right. It is pretty potent. There are 10 doses of marijuana in this small bar.
Wow, that's a lot.
This is actually 10 doses of marijuana.
Oh my, that's terrible.
I just think it takes a level of education to the consumers so that people are using them responsibly.
Adults aren't the only ones ending up in trouble. The Children's Hospital Colorado reports a surge of kids admitted after consuming edible pot. They've treated at least 9 children since January, 6 who were critically ill.
There's basically like 3 doses in them.
State regulators are now looking into stricter requirements, including better labeling and no more than 1 dose per package. Until then, industry insiders urge edible enthusiasts to consume with caution.
Anna Cabrera joins us now live at a pot dispensary. So, Anna, question is, with the recreational marijuana market growing, are edibles, it's surely not the only concern, is it?
Well, Don, edibles are the biggest concern right now because there have been those obvious issues that have risen to the surface. But maybe you're wondering about pot-related DUIs or other crimes. We do know that the Colorado State Patrol just started keeping track of those marijuana-specific DUI citations. And so far, month to month, they're seeing about 10 to 15% of total DUIs are indeed marijuana related, so ultimately they're still seeing more people driving under the influence of alcohol. But we do know that police are ticketing a lot of people for getting high in public. That's still something that's against Colorado laws here. And so we know 350 people have been given citations for this just since the beginning of the year in Denver alone. Now, that's still a relatively small number when you consider we're inside a pot dispensary that sees up to 10,000 customers every month, Don.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that question. We see a little snapshot when you do live shots from there, and we see it up on the screen, and you know it's increased by this much. But since you've been there, business, is it booming? Is it steady?
It is steady, I guess you could say. You know, when we were doing live shots back at the beginning of the new year, there was this initial rush where we were seeing lines down the block outside marijuana dispensaries. Those long lines are gone, but they're still seeing plenty of people. We're hearing from dispensary owners that, the supply-demand is sort of balancing out, so they see that as a good thing. And again, they aren't short on customers, so it's sort of win-win in their eyes.
Today, police in Indiana said 2 people were killed overnight when trees fell on their homes. Severe storms tore through the Midwest. A teenager in Iowa died after being swept into a storm drain. In Chicago, lightning struck the city's tallest building, the Willis Tower. Heavy rain flooded the main highway to O'Hare Airport. Some travelers got out of their cars and had to walk to the terminal. The first tropical storm of the season formed today off the east coast of Florida. This is a satellite picture of Arthur with highest sustained winds of 50 miles an hour. Will it strengthen, and where is it headed? For that, we'll turn to meteorologist Craig Stetzer of our CBS station WFOR. Craig?
Good evening, Scott. The hurricane hunters were out this afternoon investigating Arthur. They found a strengthening tropical storm out there, winds at 50 miles an hour. Overall environment is favorable for additional strengthening. Wind shear is low, and it's very warm, the waters here. In fact, the track is going to take it right along the Gulf Stream over the next several days. Now, Arthur's forecast to accelerate north, approaching the Carolina coast, possibly as a Category 1 or maybe even a low-end Category 2 storm Thursday in the Thursday night time frame. Obviously, if it takes the track farther to the west, it would have a more significant impact to the Carolinas and could be similar to the 2011 Irene storm in the Carolinas. After that, it's back out to sea. But the folks in the Carolinas need to start thinking about their preparations. Scott?
We'll keep watching. Craig Setzer of WFOR. Thank you, Craig. Today, China's military pledged its loyalty to the Communist Party after a former top general became the latest to be kicked out of the party for corruption. China's president is behind this purge, and Seth Doan is in Beijing.
The news, 4 top officials removed for taking bribes, was announced on state TV, while the anchor underlined the resolve in the Communist Party's fight against corruption. One of the accused, Xu Taiho, was one of China's top generals. Xu is the highest-level military officer to be investigated since 1949. It's sending shockwaves through the People's Liberation Army. Also charged with accepting bribes, a vice minister for state security, the official in charge of state-owned telecom and mining companies, and a manager of the state-owned oil and gas company. When President Xi Jinping took over last year, he promised to stamp out corrupt officials, from top bureaucrats to low-level clerks. In China, they're nicknamed tigers and flies. A cartoon in today's South China Morning Post shows a tiger and a fly chatting in jail. Both are in because of Xi Jinping. Lest any of this be missed by the masses, the People's Daily, a Communist Party mouthpiece, released a computer game where users can give electric shocks to corrupt officials. This crackdown is popular because it's seen as long overdue, but it may also serve another purpose. Many of those under investigation have been political enemies of China's top leaders.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again vowed revenge against Palestinian militants for the kidnapping and murder of 3 teenage seminary students. Netanyahu was among the mourners who attended their funeral. More now from Alex Ortiz in Israel.
Hundreds of thousands flooded into the cemetery to pay their last respects to the 3 teenagers. Their bodies were found yesterday beneath a pile of rocks in an open field near Hebron. The grisly discovery set off a wave of grief across the country. Earlier in the day, at a memorial service for Naftali Frankel, his mother said a final goodbye. "We will learn to sing without you," she said. "We will always hear your voice in our hearts." Just before the funeral, a recording of a panicky cell phone call made by Gilad Shar to emergency police was broadcast by local TV stations. "We're being kidnapped," he told the police. In the background, a kidnapper yells, "Keep your head down." Then the line goes dead. Israel blames Hamas, the militant Islamic group, for the kidnappings and killings. Hamas has never claimed responsibility, but has applauded the abductions as a heroic act. The teen's disappearance more than 2 weeks ago set off a massive security crackdown as Israeli forces searched house to house near Hebron. More than 400 Palestinians have been arrested. Last night, Israeli forces dropped 34 bombs on targets in the Gaza Strip, in retaliation for Palestinian rocket fire sent into Israel. Scott, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met late into the night with his security cabinet here. It's unclear what steps come next, but earlier tonight he did warn that Israel would continue its crackdown against Hamas and could even expand military operations in Gaza.
Around the world tonight, into that troubling headline from Israel in the case of those 3 missing teenagers, one of them a U.S. citizen. Well, tonight, authorities believe those boys are now dead, found not far from where they disappeared, and this evening a blistering salvo from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
David, the grief and outrage over these murders tonight in Israel is extraordinary. The boys' bodies were found under a pile of rocks in an open field. The 3 boys disappeared from a hitchhiking stop in the West Bank town of Hebron. Among them, that dual Israeli-American citizen, 16-year-old Naftali Frankel, whose family came to Israel from Brooklyn, the FBI joining the investigation tonight. The abductions prompted one of Israel's largest search and security operations in more than a decade. The Palestinian militant group Hamas was quickly blamed for the abductions. 400 Palestinians were arrested. Hamas denies any involvement, but tonight Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu saying they were abducted and murdered in cold blood by human animals. Hamas is responsible and Hamas will pay. And tonight, airstrikes are being reported in Gaza. These horrific murders have clearly dimmed any hopes for progress on a peace agreement in a country already on edge. David?
All right, just a horrible headline late today. Martha, thank you.
We continue with Robert Downey Jr. speaking out about his son's addiction problem. The superstar's 20-year-old son was arrested on drug charges over the weekend, and the actor, who has had his own well-publicized battle with addiction, says genetics could be to blame. ABC's Rena Ninan has more.
He's the superstar who's the driving force behind blockbusters like The Avengers and Iron Man.
How about that?
This morning, Robert Downey Jr. is speaking out in support of his son, 20-year-old Indio Downey, released on bail after being arrested in Hollywood Sunday afternoon on suspicion of possession of cocaine and drug paraphernalia. Downey Jr. candidly telling ABC News, unfortunately, there's a genetic component to addiction, and Indio has likely inherited it. Also, there's a lot of family support and understanding, and we're all determined to rally behind him and help him become the man he's capable of being. Downey Jr. has played addicts on the big screen, but off-screen he's been fighting addiction his entire life, saying that for him, addiction started at a very young age.
When did you do your first drug?
Before I was 8 years old.
Addiction is a genetic disorder in the sense of it's a roll of the dice if you have that genetic component or not, just like blue eyes or green eyes. What Robert Downey Jr. has done in such a beautiful way is to be an example of an addict in recovery.
But he's also become the success story for overcoming addiction, opening up to Diane Sawyer in 2004, 2 years into his sobriety.
We've known each other for so long, but you've seen the whole thing, and you saw when I was kind of, you know, full of crap back in the cry help days, and I could see in your eyes that you were like, oh, not quite done yet, but to have this feeling of groundedness now and a little humility is really liberating.
Now he's hoping to see his son through this dark time he knows so well, telling us, we're grateful to the Sheriff's Department for their intervention and believe Indio can be another recovery success story instead of a cautionary tale.